Before we begin, I want to quickly mention that I have commissions open, and I also sell the Mechanisms merch, fan merch. If you're interested in that, you can check out the links in the description below. There will be all the information you need about that. And yeah, let's begin. So this video is something like a try at the long format talking videos for me, because I am planning on a bigger the mechanisms related video in the future. I'm still currently making a script for that, so wait around for that. But today I will be talking about the issues in the Mechanisms fandom that I personally found, as well as they've been mentioned by my partner and by my friends in the fandom. Personally, I've been in the fandom for a little bit over 2 years now, so I can't talk about if they've been for a long time, but this is what I've noticed in these 2 years, so I'm gonna be talking about that. And first we will be talking about racism in the fandom, because unfortunately there is some issues with that, as in all fandoms. I feel like I'm not exactly the best person to talk about racism, as I'm white, very white, but I still want to talk about that because it's not an issue that is usually brought up. So yeah. The first will be probably in the racism is whitewashing of the characters in the fan art. With Ashes it happens less, as I've seen, but there are some unfortunate instances of whitewashing Ashes. But the character it happens the most to is probably Marius. Marius is whitewashed all the time, and I get that in some photos he is white passing, even though not really, to be honest. It's not really white passing, it's just the lighting. But it got to the point where I had to make a Tumblr post detailing Marius and as well Coffee Young's skin tone, because it's such an issue in the fandom that I see all the time. Just please stop drawing Marius white. He's not white. Yeah, this is the first part of the racism. The other part of the racism that I want to talk about is how Ashes is characterized. So they're characterized most of the time as very aggressive and cold-blooded and very masculine, which is stereotypes, like racist stereotypes, because Ashes, no, they're not that, because it gets to the point where it's like two-dimensional Ashes. It's like written as a two-dimensional character who is only masculine, aggressive and cold-blooded. It's really weird, but this is a problem in fanfiction mostly that I see, but also in posts about headcanons of the characters. Like, Ashes is just not bad. So let's talk about the second point, which is Violent Spectre. So Violent Spectre is a ship name for the ship between Marius, Von Raum, and Inspector Lefrasier Ida. I have to say, I have some bias against Violent Spectre just because it's not what I like, and there are reasons why I don't like it. First of all, when people write Violent Spectre or draw Violent Spectre, mostly we will talk about writing right now, they make characters cardboard cutouts. Like, genuinely, Marius is dumbed down to dorky, lovesick, like, guy who just very silly and, like, non-serious and only, like, obsessed with Liv, to the point where I saw once a joke on Tumblr where it was like along the lines of a cab leaving Marius the second he sees Lifrasir Ida, which is wild. Like, what do you mean? First of all, no, a cab can't leave Marius' body because it's a fucking political stance. He is a pirate. He is an outlaw. What do you mean? What do you mean a cab is leaving his body? Just nonsense. But also, Marius has in his backstory issues with military, with authorities. It's not just when he turned to immortality that he started to be against authority, against cops, against military. No. It's in his backstory. They're also like saying, oh, it's enemies to lovers, and absolutely ignore hatred from Marius towards Lifrasir, and only say that Lifrasir kinda hated and were very annoyed with Marius, and that's all. This is not how enemies to lovers work. And another thing that is like absolutely wild for me is that I see fanners of Lifrasir Ida, like fan designs of Lifrasir Ida, and also then written out stories with them where they claim that, yeah, it's a non-binary character, etc., etc., but then they almost exclusively draw them feminine. And I know that non-binary people don't owe anyone androgyny or anything like that, but it gets to the point where it becomes a pattern when you see a character, Marius, who is mostly, almost exclusively shipped with female characters like Rafaela and Ivy, which is also an issue with me because I hate it. Make that man gay as well, please. Anyway, but they make this character who is almost exclusively shipped with female characters, and then they make a non-binary character they ship him with also very feminine. This is headslop. This is heteronormative relationships, as well as not, it goes beyond just looks. It also how Marius is like winning over, in quotes, winning over Lifrasir. It's how Marius is always portrayed as masculine and Lif as feminine, and the dynamics are the same. And it's just, no. This is heteronormative things that you're trying to make woke by just slapping a label and forgetting about it. No. The third issue, I would say, is again about Lifrasir Ida, which is no one acknowledges that Lifrasir Ida is a cop. Or at least was a cop. They like make that, yeah, Lifrasir were a cop, but they're not anymore. They weren't like, they were the good one. They were a good cop. No, there is no such thing as a good cop. Please elaborate. At least like include some issues of them being a cop into your writing or your fan arts if you want to take it seriously. Because them being a cop is a detrimental thing. This is like a very important piece of their character, especially in the album. They're impulsive, they're not a good cop. They're not a good cop even by the definitions and what people think a good cop is. Because Lifrasir Ida shown to be impulsive, eager to judge, very annoyed at inmates doing their job badly. They broke the black box. What are we doing here? Like, genuinely, why do you not include Lifrasir being a cop into the storytelling when it's a very important piece of their character? Issue number 4 is that I already kind of mentioned it in the Violent Spectre, but stereotyping characters. I know it's like a problem with almost all fandoms, I guess, even if not even all fandoms at all. But the stereotyping to the point where it's again cardboard cutouts of characters. Johnny being idiot, illiterate, angry man, and Marius being a silly little guy and absolutely incompetent. I've seen so many headcanons from people where they headcanoning basic routine skills that every human generally has to know, like cooking or reading or anything. But when they're talking about Marius or some other characters like Johnny, they're making it like, oh, they're surprisingly good at this, or they're surprisingly know how to do this, and it's like the most basic necessity. They've been living for millennia. Do you really think they don't know how to cook? What? What are you saying? And as I mentioned in the first point about racism, it also goes with the racist stereotypes of Ashes. Or they boil down the whole Gunpowder Team's character to, oh, I'm sad about my dead boyfriend, and like that's all. Or they sometimes, the most popular being the hard eyes that I will be talking about later, but they just boil down this and it's infuriating. Okay, the next point, the fifth point, is the problem with polymechs, the ship where all of the mechanisms are in the polyamorous relationships. The problem with that is that in most of the cases they exclude Nastya, Aurora, and Toy Soldier out of the polymechs because Nastya and Aurora are quote-unquote their own couple, and Toy Soldier just doesn't know anything, and they're babyfying Toy Soldier to the point of, this is an infant. This is not an infant. Toy Soldier is not an infant. I failed to mention that in stereotyping characters in the previous point, but the amount of infantilizing of Toy Soldier in the fandom is genuinely concerning. Toy Soldier, like Nastya, Aurora, and Toy Soldier are the only characters that canonically were mentioned to participate in sexual activities. Nastya and Aurora are the only characters that are canonically in polyamorous sexual activities, because in the first fiction on the Mechanism's website, The Breakup, it is mentioned that Nastya and Aurora have queer orgies, and then you exclude Nastya and Aurora from polymechs? Are you for real? And Toy Soldier, they are excluding it just because the infantilization, basically, of Toy Soldier. Don't get me wrong, I don't find anything wrong with people headcanoning Toy Soldier as exclusively aromantic, asexual. But the problem is, when people do ship polymechs, it means all polymechs, all of the mechanisms should be in the polyamory relationships. Why are you excluding the mechanisms from the polyamory relationships, especially the mechanisms that are known canonically to have polyamorous relationships, like Nastya and Aurora? This is just mind-numbing. Next point kinda ties into the topic of the polymechs, but it's Johnny and Nastya being siblings Fanon. This Fanon is so fundamental to most people that they forget that this is Fanon and not canon, to the point where if you say that you don't find anything weird with Johnny and Nastya being shipped together, or being in anything other than sibling relationships, people start to call you an apologist to incest, which is just, this is not it. There is no connection in canon of Johnny and Nastya being siblings in any shape or form. The only reason this fanon emerged at all is because they banter sometimes. They're shown to have banter, that's all. But the problem is, Johnny is bantering with almost anyone. There is banter between Tim and Johnny. There is banter between Brian and Johnny. There is banter between Ashes and Johnny. Why are we not fanoning them as siblings? And like, yes, I guess the Nasty and Johnny were one of the first mechanisms to be mechanized, like one of the first people to be mechanized, so they lived together for longer than any of the others. But why is it exclusively them? Like, if we want to say that, like, Carmela is the mother, then all of the mechanisms should be siblings. This Fanon is just... I don't find anything bad with this Fanon, but the problem arises when this Fanon is treated like canon, and people like starting to throw incest allegations against other people who just don't support this Fanon. Like, please stop saying that Johnny and Nastia can only be seen as siblings. Please. Anyways, let's talk about the next point. The 7th point is that Heart Eyes are the most popular ship in the fandom. Now, I personally don't find anything bad with Heart Eyes. I personally ship it as well. I like it. But Heart Eyes get to the point where all of the other ships, except for maybe like Hades, Ashes, and Persephone team, all of the other ships are just so strived for content. For any content. There is no content for any other ships other than Heart Eyes and Hades and Persephone team. There is no other content, and this is infuriating. This issue is mostly just my personal taste, per se, but I really find it really annoying. So let's move to the next issue. Neglect of other characters. This kind of ties with the Heart Eyes issue, I guess. But there are very few characters that get most of the content in the fandom space, which is Johnny Deville, Gunpowder Tim, which is like mostly seen only in Heart Eyes, to be honest, or Persephone Tim. There's just nothing else. Nothing else. But yeah, Johnny Deville is probably the most character that has content. And I guess it makes sense because he's the lead singer, he vocalizes most of the pieces and all of that, but can we please show some love for other characters, especially women, because I personally am at fault as well for not making content with female characters in the mechanisms, but this is the problem, not that I don't like female characters, it's the problem that I can only make content with Marius in it. This is the problem, not the problem that I prioritize male characters over female characters. But yeah, can we please get more content for more characters in the fandom? This would be really great. Next issue is Carmela as abuser. This issue is so bad that it got to the point where Maki Yamazaki, who played Carmela, who created Carmela, she had to make a statement that Carmela is not an abuser and she doesn't like when Carmela is portrayed as an abuser. There is no indication that Carmela abused the mechanisms. Yes, we know that the mechanization is a tragic event. Yes, we know that there might be some sort of not very fair play when the mechanisms were mechanized, but there is no indication that Carmela was an abuser. The airlocking of Carmela was a repetitive event that should be seen as more of the kids did something and they don't want mom to know, so they throw mom away through an airlock because they're violent pirates. That's it. Carmela is not an abuser. Can we please stop portraying Carmela as an abuser? She is not. End of discussion. And the final point that I want to talk about is neglect of fiction and most of the side characters. So I have to be honest with you for a moment, but I have not read all of the fiction yet. I've read all of the non-album fictions, and I've read most of the Ulysses Dies at Dawn fiction. I have not read yet
the Once Upon a Time in Space fiction and Fanon over Carmela fiction, which I am planning on fixing because I do want to read all of the fiction, but the problem is that it's hard for me to read in general, so that's the issue I'm having with fiction. Not that I just neglect fiction because I think it's not necessary for understanding of the albums, of the stories. No. So people don't go too much into lore because they don't read fictions. And this is really upsetting because people make claims about lore, they make headcanons, they make content, but then it just, like, they would not fucking do this, or they would not fucking say this. Like, this is the issue. And this issue is easily fixed by reading fiction and reading some content that the creators, like the actors and musicians said about the albums and all of that. For example, the most prone example I see is that people make their Fanon appearances for characters in Fanon over Camelot, they make them white, or any, like, at least one character is most likely white. In most of the fanarts, at least one character from Fanon over Camelot is probably white. The problem with that is that in canon, it's canonically that all of the people of the full Galfridian are non-white. They are all people of color. And this is a canon thing, and people just neglect that. And they neglect, as well as, like, the problem with neglecting all of the, like, most of the side characters is that the only side character that really gets any content or, like, anything is probably Lifrasir Ida, and sometimes I've seen a little bit of a spike in popularity for Galahad, but that's kind of all. And this is really upsetting because I do want to see more fanarts of side characters, and I want to see more people reading fiction and making proper headcanons based on the full lore, which can only be attained from reading the fiction as well as listening to the music, to the albums. So these were all of the issues I have with the Mechanisms fandom that I personally found. There probably may be some more minor ones, but this is what I've come up with. If you liked this video, please leave a like, please comment if you have any other issues in the fandom that you've seen. Please discuss whatever I said in the video, because I would love to hear your thoughts and to see your opinions on that. Bye!